Amanda Anisimova said it was past her bedtime. That's the line everyone's going to clip. Not the scoreline, not the fact that she just knocked out the hottest player on tour, not the two-time Grand Slam finalist pedigree she brought into that match. A tennis player, mid-tournament, at one of the biggest events on the calendar, telling a stadium full of people in Cincinnati that she needed a pick-me-up because she should probably be asleep. I love that quote. I think it tells you more about what happened on that court than the box score does, and I want to walk through why. Because here's the thing about Alex Eala heading into Tuesday night. She wasn't just playing well. She was playing at a level where losing had almost stopped being a realistic outcome in people's heads. 8 wins in 9 matches, a title in Washington, a run to the third round in Toronto, a 9-4 record against top 10 opponents for the year. When a player builds that kind of streak, something happens to the way crowds watch her. She stops being an underdog story and starts being an inevitability. And inevitability is a dangerous thing to carry onto a tennis court because it's not really about your forehand anymore. It's about what everyone in the building expects to see. Anisimova walked into that expectation cold. First time meeting. No history, no head to head to lean on, nothing except her own resume and whatever she could read off Eala's shots in real time. And for one set, the expectation held up exactly the way it was supposed to. Eala broke early, controlled the rally lengths, closed out the first set 6-4 on the Lindner Family Tennis Center court. And if you'd walked away from your screen right there, you'd have assumed you already knew how the story ended. Except tennis doesn't care what the first act tells you. Anisimova won the next 2 sets 6-4, 6-2. That's not a slow bleed. That's a fairly definitive reversal from a player who, by her own admission afterward, felt like she needed outside help just to survive the moment. I know Alex is such a great player and such a fighter, she said in her on court interview. I knew it was going to be a really tough match. Not exactly the words of someone who expected to steamroll anybody. And then the part that actually matters. There was quite a bit of support for me tonight, so I really appreciate that because I know how loved Alex is, and for good reason. Sit with that phrasing for a second because it's doing a lot of work. She's not downplaying Iala's popularity, she's actively affirming it twice in the same breath as thanking the fans who were pulling for her instead. That's a specific kind of composure. A lot of players in that spot would either ignore the crowd dynamic entirely or lean into some vague, safe platitude about just focusing on my side of the net. Anisimova named it directly. She acknowledged she was the away team in a building that, by her own account, still leaned toward the other player, and she said thank you to the minority that had her back. Then she topped it off with the bedtime line, which functions almost like a release valve, deflating the seriousnesses of everything she'd just said, reminding you she's a 24-year-old who just wanted to go to sleep and instead had to go 3 sets with one of the form players of the summer. Now, here's where I want to slow down because the numbers tell a slightly different story than the interview does, and that gap is the real substance of this piece. Anisimova served 3 aces. She won 67% of her first serve points. Both of those numbers are solid, competent, professional, the kind of stat line that supports a straightforward 3 set win. But she also served 7 double faults, 7, against a player who at that point in the tournament had been converting break chances at a rate that should have made every one of those free points terrifying to give away. And here's the detail that should stop you. Eala served 7 double faults too. Two players who, statistically, were beating themselves on serve roughly the same amount in the same match on the same night, and the outcome still swung decisively toward the player who talked afterward like she'd needed divine intervention just to hang on. So which is it? Was this the calm, controlled, appreciative performance the post-match interview suggested, or was this a genuinely shaky night on serve that Anisimova happened to survive? Because her second serve return game and her first serve percentage were just marginally sharper than Eala's when it mattered. I think it's both, and I think that's the actual story. Amanda Anisimova played a match where her serve was cracking under real pressure. 7 double faults in a 3 setter against a red hot opponent is not a small number, and it's the kind of stat that usually correlates with nerves, not comfort. But she still found a way to win the metric that decides matches like this. Second serve points won, where she edged Eala 50% to 46. That 4 point gap doesn't sound like much. In a match this tight, decided by a single break in each of the final 2 sets, it's close to the entire margin. That's the hidden variable in this one. Not the crowd noise, not the fatigue, not some dramatic momentum shift you can point to on a highlight reel. It's a 4 percentage point edge on the least glamorous stat in tennis, buried under a scoreline that already looked decisive and an interview that made it sound even more comfortable than the numbers actually support. Anisimova wasn't cruising. She was hanging on by the frame of her racket in spots, double faulting her way into pressure she didn't need to create, and she got away with it because her return game held up exactly when Eala's serve needed her own second delivery to be a weapon instead of a liability. Which brings me back to that first set. because I don't think Eala's 6-4 lead was some kind of fluke that got corrected. She earned it. She was controlling depth, dictating rally patterns, doing the things that had made her nearly unbeatable for the last month. Therefore, the second set is the actual pivot point worth studying, not because Eala suddenly played badly, but because Anisimova's return positioning tightened up just enough to start pulling errors out of Eala's forehand side, the same wing that had been the engine of that first set win. Small margins, a step here, a half second of extra time there, but small margins are the entire sport at this level. And that's really what I keep coming back to with this Eala storyline all summer. Every match she loses gets treated like a crisis because the win streak had gotten people used to a different outcome. But 6-4 in the first set against a two-time major finalist in a first ever meeting on a hard court isn't a bad performance. It's a genuinely competitive match that swung on a handful of second serve points and one player's slightly better composure in the moments that decided sets 2 and 3. The story isn't that Eala fell apart. The story is that Anisimova, by her own description a little rattled and running on fumes, still found the small technical edge that mattered most and had the self-awareness afterward to be honest about how close it actually felt. There's also something worth noting about what Anisimova chose to say about the crowd beyond just the politeness of it. She didn't just thank her own supporters, she framed Eala's popularity as earned, as something with real substance behind it, in the same interview where she'd just ended Eala's run. That's not nothing. Players get asked constantly about hostile atmospheres and fan bias, and the easy answer is always some version of I just play my game. Anisimova instead validated the exact dynamic working against her. It reads less like diplomacy and more like genuine respect for what Eala has built this year. The kind of fan base that shows up and makes noise for a player who, by ranking alone, wouldn't necessarily draw that reaction from a mostly American crowd rooting for the woman who reached back to back major finals last season. So, where does this leave both players heading forward? For Anisimova, the immediate assignment is Wimbledon champion Linda Noskova in the fourth round, and the double fault number is the thing I'd be watching first. 7 in 1 match against Eala is a warning sign, not a footnote. Noskova returned second serves as well as almost anyone left in the draw, and a repeat performance on the free point column could turn a winnable fourth round match into a short night. Anisimova has history on her side here, a 2-1 head-to-head, including a win over Noskova in last year's China Open final. But that record was built without the version of Noskova currently walking around with a Wimbledon trophy, and it was built without 7 double faults hanging over the match before it even starts. For Eala, this is a loss that ends a run, not a career trajectory. 9 wins in 10 matches, a maiden WTA title, a 9-4 record against the top 10 heading into Tuesday, one tight three-setter against a major finalist decided by a handful of points on the least visible stat in the sport doesn't undo any of that. If anything, the fact that she took the first set off a player of Anisimova's caliber in a first meeting tells you the ceiling on this run hasn't been found yet. It just got interrupted for one night in Cincinnati. Here's my tactical blueprint heading into that Noskova match. Watch Anisimova's ball toss consistency in the opening service games. 7 double faults rarely happens in isolation. It's usually a tell that the toss is drifting under pressure, and a sharp returner like Noskova will start standing further inside the baseline the moment she smells hesitation on that first delivery. If Anisimova can tighten that toss and keep her double fault count in single digits early, her second serve return numbers from the Eala match suggest she has enough there to trouble Noskova regardless of the crowd. If she doesn't, this becomes a very short fourth round, and the story out of Cincinnati stops being about a gracious post match interview and starts being about a serve that never got fixed when it had the chance.